What if a single cup of spilled coffee could shatter a life, only to rebuild it into something unimaginable? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of how a moment of public humiliation at the hands of a ruthless billionaire became the catalyst for a dangerous game of corporate espionage. We're about to unravel the story of Maya, a waitress who went from serving New York's elite to outsmarting them. It's a tale of power deception and an apology that came with a price tag you won't believe, an unlimited black card that was anything but a gift. Stay with us. The clatter of silverware on fine china, the low hum of conversations weaving through the opulent dining room of the Gilded Spoon, and the scent of truffle oil and ambition. This was Maya's world for the past 2 years, since she'd arrived in New York City with a portfolio of art school dreams and a mountain of student loan debt. This world had been her reality. She was a ghost in the machine of the city's elite, a silent observer of their lavish lives, their clandestine deals, and their casual cruelty. Maya was more than just a waitress. She was an anthropologist of the 1%. She could tell a real estate mogul from a tech prodigy by the way they held their wine glass. She knew the subtle tells of a failing marriage in the space between a husband and wife's chairs. She saw the desperation behind the forced smiles and the loneliness that lingered in their eyes long after the last drop of vintage Bordeaux was gone. She was a good waitress, one of the best. Her movements were a symphony of efficiency and grace. She could navigate the labyrinth of tables with the agility of a dancer. Her memory, a steel trap for complex orders and dietary restrictions. But her greatest skill was her invisibility. She had perfected the art of being present, without being seen, a necessary survival tactic, in a world where the service staff were often treated as extensions of the furniture. Her dreams, however, were anything but invisible. They were vibrant, chaotic canvases, splashed with the colors of a life she yearned for. A life where she could trade her black and white uniform for paint-splattered overalls, where the scent of turpentine replaced the cloying sweetness of expensive perfume. Her small, sun-drenched apartment in the East Village was her sanctuary, the walls covered with her charcoal sketches and half-finished paintings. They were her escape, her promise to herself that this life of servitude was just a temporary stop on a much grander journey. But the city had a way of grinding down dreams, of turning vibrant colors into muted shades of gray. The rent was a relentless beast, her student loans a looming shadow. Each day, she felt the familiar gnaw of anxiety. The fear that she would become one of the city's countless cautionary tales, the artist who forgot how to create the dreamer, who woke up to a life of quiet desperation. Tonight, the anxiety was a particularly sharp sting. Her landlord had just raised her rent, a casual act of financial violence that had sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She needed more shifts, more tips, more of the sycophantic smiles and feigned deference that paid her bills. The Gilded Spoon was buzzing with its usual Friday night energy. The air was thick with the heady cocktail of wealth and power. Seated at table 7, a prime piece of real estate in the restaurant's geography, was Adrian Ashford. Even in a room full of titans, Ashford was a leviathan. He was the kind of man who didn't just enter a room. He conquered it. His presence was an atmospheric disturbance, a shift in the gravitational pull of the space. He was the CEO of Ashford Industries, a sprawling tech conglomerate that had its tendrils in everything from satellite communications to artificial intelligence. His face was a regular feature on the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, his name a byword for ruthless innovation and a take-no-prisoners approach to business. He was dining alone, a rare sight that had set the staff on edge. Ashford was known for his tempestuous moods, his laser-like focus, and his complete intolerance for incompetence. He was the kind of customer who could get a waiter fired for a misplaced fork. Maya had been assigned his table. A small involuntary shiver went down her spine as she approached him. He was hunched over his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration, the harsh blue light of the screen illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He looked younger than his pictures, probably in his late 30s, but there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of a man who had seen too much, fought too many battles. "Good evening, Mr. Ashford. Can I get you something to drink?" Maya's voice was a carefully calibrated blend of professionalism and warmth. He didn't look up from his phone. "Black coffee, and make it quick." His voice was a low growl, a rumble of thunder in the distance. Maya retreated to the service station, her heart pounding a little faster than usual. She prepared the coffee with meticulous care, ensuring the temperature was perfect, the cup and saucer pristine. She took a deep breath, pasted on her professional smile, and headed back to the table. And then it happened. A busboy, a new kid named Leo, who was still learning the intricate dance of the dining room, stumbled. A tray of water glasses went flying, a cascade of shattering glass and splashing water. Maya, in a desperate attempt to avoid the collision, sidestepped her body, lurching to the right. The coffee cup, a fragile vessel of porcelain and hot liquid, tilted in her hand. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, it seemed to hang in the air, a suspended moment of impending doom. And then, with a horrifying inevitability, it fell. The dark liquid arced through the air, a brown slash against the pristine white of Ashford's shirt. It was a direct hit. The silence that followed was deafening. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath. The low hum of conversation died. The clatter of silverware ceased. All eyes were on table 7. Ashford looked down at his ruined shirt. Then slowly, with a chilling deliberation, he raised his head. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, locked onto Maya's. The weariness was gone, replaced by a cold reptilian fury. "You clumsy fool," he hissed, his voice low, but carrying the weight of a death sentence. Maya stood frozen, the empty cup and saucer still in her hand. The blood had drained from her face. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident." "An accident?" He laughed, a short, sharp bark devoid of any humor. "This shirt is a custom Brioni. It costs more than you make in a month. And this phone—" He gestured to the device on the table, which had also been splashed with coffee, contains information that could make or break a $1 billion deal. Your accident could cost me more than you'll ever see in your lifetime. He stood up, his towering frame casting a long, intimidating shadow over her. "What's your name?" he demanded. "Maya." She whispered, her voice barely audible. "Well, Maya," he sneered, drawing out her name with a cruel satisfaction. "You're fired. Get out of my sight." He threw a wad of cash onto the table, a contemptuous gesture that was more insulting than a slap in the face. "For the shirt," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. And then he turned and strode out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of stunned silence and Maya's shattered dignity in his path. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The Gilded Spoon, once a place of structured, predictable chaos, had become a surreal landscape of judgment and pity. The faces of the patrons swam before Maya's eyes, a blur of morbid curiosity and detached sympathy. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Henderson, rushed to her side, his face a mask of frantic apology and barely concealed anger. "Maya, what happened?" He hissed his voice, a sibilant whisper that was somehow louder than the ambient noise of the restaurant. The busboy," she stammered, her mind struggling to form a coherent sentence. "I don't care about the busboy." Mr. Henderson snapped his eyes, darting nervously towards the empty doorway through which Adrian Ashford had disappeared. That was Adrian Ashford. "Do you have any idea who he is?" Maya nodded mutely, the name echoing in her ears like a death knell. "He's one of our most important clients," Mr. Henderson continued, his voice rising in pitch. "He could buy this restaurant and turn it into his personal shoe closet if he wanted to, and you just doused him in coffee." "It was an accident," she repeated, her voice a little stronger this time, a spark of defiance flickering in the ashes of her humiliation. "Accidents don't happen to men like Adrian Ashford." Mr. Henderson retorted his words, a cold slap of reality. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of pity and exasperation. "Go home, Maya. Just go home. We'll talk about this tomorrow." The words hung in the air, an unspoken threat. Talk about this tomorrow was restaurant speak for clean out your locker. She was fired. Adrian Ashford, with a few contemptuous words, had extinguished her livelihood. She turned to leave her legs feeling like lead. A few of her colleagues offered her sympathetic glances, their eyes filled with a shared understanding of the precariousness of their profession. Others, however, looked at her with a hint of schadenfreude, a smug satisfaction that it was her, not them, who had incurred the wrath of a billionaire. As she made her way towards the staff exit, a woman at a nearby table caught her eye. She was impeccably dressed, her face a study in elegant composure. She gave Maya a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of solidarity that was both surprising and strangely comforting. As Maya passed her table, the woman discreetly slipped a small embossed business card into her hand. Maya didn't look at it. She simply clutched it in her palm, the sharp edges of the card a grounding sensation in the swirling vortex of her emotions. She pushed open the door to the back alley, and the cool night air hit her like a physical blow. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a subway train beneath her feet, suddenly seemed amplified, a chaotic symphony of indifference to her personal catastrophe. She leaned against the cold brick wall, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the ordeal draining away, leaving her feeling hollow and exposed. The tears she had been holding back finally came hot and silent tracks down her cheeks. They weren't just tears of humiliation. They were tears of rage, of frustration, of a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion. She was tired of being invisible, of being at the mercy of the whims of the wealthy. She was tired of the constant struggle, the gnawing anxiety, the feeling that she was running a race she could never win. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her sister, a cheerful, bubbly message filled with emojis and exclamation points. "How was your day? Did you make enough for the rent, monster?" The question was a fresh stab of pain. She couldn't bring herself to answer. She couldn't tell her sister that she had just lost her job in the most spectacular and humiliating way imaginable. She looked down at the business card in her hand. The embossed letters glinted in the dim light of the alley. Catherine Connolly, investigative journalist, The New York Chronicle. Below the name was a phone number and an email address. A journalist. Why would a journalist give her a business card? Was she looking for a story, a juicy tidbit about the volatile temper of Adrian Ashford? The thought made her stomach churn. The last thing she wanted was to have her humiliation splashed across the pages of a newspaper. She was about to throw the card into a nearby dumpster when she hesitated. Something held her back. Maybe it was the woman's expression, the flicker of understanding in her eyes. Or maybe it was a tiny, desperate flicker of hope. A hope that she could somehow fight back. She slipped the card into her pocket and started the long, lonely walk home. The city which had once seemed so full of promise now felt like a cold, unforgiving labyrinth. The towering skyscrapers were no longer symbols of aspiration. They were monuments to a world she would never be a part of. Her apartment, her sanctuary, felt different tonight. The vibrant colors of her paintings seemed to mock her, a reminder of a dream that was slipping further and further away. She sat on her small second-hand couch, the silence of the room amplifying the turmoil in her mind. She replayed the scene at the restaurant over and over again, each time feeling the sting of Ashford's words, the weight of the entire dining room's gaze. She thought about his face, the cold fury in his eyes. There was something else there too, something she couldn't quite decipher. A flash of something. Desperation. Fear. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. What would a man like Adrian Ashford have to be afraid of? Her eyes fell on a small framed photo on her bookshelf. It was a picture of her parents, their faces beaming with pride at her art school graduation. They had sacrificed so much for her, worked double shifts, taken out a second mortgage on their house, all so she could pursue her dream. A fresh wave of shame washed over her. She had let them down. She had failed. The anger returned, a slow, simmering burn. It was a righteous anger, an anger born of injustice. She had done nothing wrong. It was an accident. And yet she was the one paying the price. She pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She typed Adrian Ashford into the search bar. The results were a deluge of articles, interviews, and profiles. The titan of tech, the man who reinvented the future. The billionaire with the Midas touch. She scrolled through the articles, a picture of the man beginning to form in her mind. He was a brilliant, driven, and utterly ruthless businessman. He had built his empire from the ground up, crushing his competitors with a combination of strategic genius and predatory instinct. But there were other articles too, buried deeper in the search results. Whispers of hostile takeovers, of shady business practices, of a string of lawsuits and accusations. There were stories of his volatile temper, of his demanding and often cruel treatment of his employees. Then she found something that made her pause. An article from a few months ago, a small, almost insignificant piece in a financial journal. It mentioned a growing rivalry between Ashford Industries and a Japanese conglomerate, Mitsui. The article hinted at a behind-the-scenes battle for control of a new groundbreaking technology. She remembered Ashford's words. This phone contains information that could make or break a billion-dollar deal. Could that have been what he was so on edge about? Was the coffee spill just the final straw on a day of immense pressure? It didn't excuse his behavior, not in the slightest, but it added a new layer of complexity to the man, a hint of vulnerability beneath the armor of his wealth and power. She looked at Catherine Connolly's business card again. An investigative journalist. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't interested in a story about a clumsy waitress. Maybe she was interested in a much bigger story. A story about Adrian Ashford and his enemies. A crazy, audacious idea began to form in her mind. An idea that was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if she could use this? What if she could turn this public humiliation into an opportunity? It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But what did she have to lose? She had already lost her job, her dignity, her sense of security. Maybe it was time to stop playing by the rules. Maybe it was time to start making her own. She picked up her phone, and with a trembling hand, she dialed the number on the business card. The sterile, minimalist expanse of Adrian Ashford's penthouse apartment was a stark contrast to the chaotic opulence of the Gilded Spoon. Here, high above the glittering tapestry of the city, there was only silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the air filtration system. The apartment was a monument to a life lived in a gilded cage. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city, but they also served as a constant reminder of the world he had conquered, a world that was now his to command. The furniture was a collection of modern art pieces, aesthetically pleasing but cold and uninviting. There were no photographs, no personal mementos, no signs that a human being actually lived here. It was a space designed for a corporation, not a man. Adrian stood in front of the window, his back to the room, the city lights reflecting in his stormy eyes. He had changed out of his coffee-stained Brioni shirt, but the anger still clung to him like a shroud. It was a familiar feeling, a companion that had been with him for as long as he could remember. It was the fuel that had propelled him to the dizzying heights of success, the fire that had forged his empire. But tonight, the anger felt different. It was tainted with something else, something he couldn't quite identify. A nagging, unpleasant feeling that was as foreign to him as failure. "You handled that poorly." The voice, calm and measured, came from the shadows of the room. Elias Vance, Adrian's head of security, stepped into the light. He was a man who moved with the silent, predatory grace of a panther, his face a roadmap of a life lived in the shadows. A former Mossad agent, Elias was more than just a bodyguard. He was Adrian's confidant, his strategist, and the only person in the world who dared to speak to him with such unvarnished honesty. "I handled it," Adrian retorted, his voice a low growl. "You made a scene." Elias countered, his tone unwavering. "You humiliated a civilian, and you did it in a room full of people with cameras in their pockets. That was a tactical error." "She ruined a $10,000 shirt," Adrian snapped, turning to face him. "And you have a closet full of them," Elias said, his gaze steady. "This isn't about the shirt, Adrian. This is about Mitsui." The name hung in the air between them, a four-letter word that represented the single greatest threat to Adrian's empire. The Japanese conglomerate, led by the shrewd and ruthless Kenji Tanaka, was making a play for Ashford Industries. They were engaged in a high-stakes game of corporate warfare, a battle fought not with soldiers and guns, but with algorithms and information. "They're close," Adrian admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "They're very close." He had spent the day in a series of tense, frustrating meetings with his legal team, trying to fend off a hostile takeover bid. The information on his phone, the information that was now potentially compromised by a spilled cup of coffee, was a key piece of their defense strategy. "Which is why you can't afford to be reckless," Elias said, his voice softening slightly. "You're the face of this company, Adrian. Your public image is one of our most valuable assets. You can't be seen as a volatile, unpredictable man who bullies waitresses." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. He knew Elias was right. His outburst at the restaurant was a moment of weakness, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of his invincibility. "The girl," Elias said, his voice carefully neutral. "Maya." Adrian flinched at the sound of her name. He could see her face in his mind's eye, the shock and humiliation in her eyes. And for the first time, in a very long time, he felt a pang of something that resembled guilt. "What about her?" he asked, his voice defensive. "She could be a problem," Elias said. "She's a loose end, a disgruntled former employee with a story to tell. and in this city there are plenty of people who would pay to hear it. He was right, of course. A story about the volatile temper of Adrian Ashford could be a weapon in the hands of his enemies. It could be used to paint him as an unstable leader, a man unfit to run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. "So what do you suggest?" Adrian asked, his pride warring with his pragmatism. "You apologize," Elias said simply. Adrian stared at him incredulous. "I apologize to a waitress." "You do more than apologize," Elias said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You make a gesture, a grand gesture, something that will not only silence her, but will also turn this entire incident into a positive public relations opportunity." Adrian was intrigued. "What kind of gesture?" "Something that speaks your language," Elias said. "Something that says, I am so powerful that I can afford to be magnanimous. Something that will make her forget she ever wanted to talk to a journalist." He paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "You give her an unlimited black card." The idea was audacious, absurd, and utterly brilliant. It was a solution that was so quintessentially Adrian Ashford that he couldn't help but admire it. It was a power move, a way of turning a moment of weakness into a demonstration of his omnipotence. "Find her," Adrian said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Find the waitress." The knock on Maya's door came 2 days later, 2 days of a sleepless, anxiety-ridden haze. She had called Catherine Connolly, the journalist, and they had agreed to meet the following day. The prospect of the meeting was a source of both hope and terror. When she opened the door, she found a man in a tailored suit standing in the hallway. He was tall and imposing, with a calm, watchful demeanor that immediately set her on edge. It was Elias Vance. "Maya," he asked, his voice polite but firm. "My name is Elias Vance. I work for Mr. Ashford." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She was about to slam the door in his face when he held up a hand. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm here to deliver a message." He handed her a sleek black envelope. Her name was written on it in elegant silver script. "Mr. Ashford would like to see you," Elias said. "He wants to apologize." Maya stared at him, suspicion warring with a flicker of curiosity. "Why should I believe you?" "Because he knows he made a mistake," Elias said, his gaze unwavering, "and because he's prepared to make it right." He gave her a Tim and an address, a private suite at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. "He'll be waiting," he said, and then he turned and walked away, leaving Maya alone with the black envelope and a decision to make. She spent the rest of the day in a state of turmoil. Her first instinct was to say no, to refuse to be summoned like a servant. But the journalist Catherine had advised her to go. "Hear what he has to say," she had said. "It could be the key to everything." So with a mixture of trepidation and a strange, defiant sense of purpose, she went. The suite at the Mandarin Oriental was even more opulent than Adrian Ashford's apartment. The view of Central Park was breathtaking, the air scented with the delicate fragrance of fresh lilies. Adrian was standing by the window, much like he had been in his apartment, but this time he turned to face her as she entered. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and jeans, a deliberate attempt to appear less intimidating. "Maya," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Thank you for coming." She said nothing, simply stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mask of cautious neutrality. I want to apologize," he said, the words sounding awkward and unpracticed on his tongue. "My behavior at the restaurant was inexcusable. There's no excuse for it. I was under a great deal of pressure, but that's not your problem. I was rude, and I was cruel, and I'm sorry." The apology was more sincere than she had expected. It didn't erase the humiliation, but it was a start. "I'd like to offer you your job back," he continued, "with a significant raise, of course." Maya shook her head. "I don't want my job back." Adrian nodded, as if he had expected that. "I understand." He walked over to a small table and picked up a sleek black box. He opened it and presented it to her. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single black credit card. There was no name on it, no expiration date, just a simple, elegant A in the corner. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "It's a black card," he said, "an Ashford Industries corporate card. It has no limit." Maya stared at him, speechless. "I know it doesn't make up for what I did," he said, "but I hope it's a start. You can use it for whatever you want. A new apartment, a new car, a trip around the world. It's yours." It was an insane, preposterous gesture. It was a king's ransom, a get-out-of-jail-free card for a life of financial struggle. But Maya was no fool. She knew that nothing in this world, especially not from a man like Adrian Ashford, came for free. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice sharp. Adrian looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected her to be overwhelmed, to be grateful. He had not expected her to be suspicious. "There's no catch," he said, his voice a little too smooth. "It's a gesture of goodwill, a way of making amends." But Maya saw it, a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow that betrayed the carefully constructed sincerity of his words. There was a catch. There was always a catch. She looked at the card, then back at him. A dangerous, exhilarating idea began to form in her mind. She would take the card. She would play his game. But she would do it on her own terms. "All right," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I accept your apology." She took the box from his hand, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth surface of the card. It felt like a weapon, a key, a declaration of war. The game had begun. The unlimited black card sat on Maya's kitchen table like a dormant viper, sleek black and radiating a silent, seductive power. For 3 days, she didn't touch it. She circled it, studied it, treated it like an unexploded bomb. It was a key to a world she'd only ever glimpsed through the gilded bars of the gilded spoon, a world of unimaginable luxury and freedom. But it was also a chain, a link to Adrian Ashford, a man she knew with a chilling certainty was not in the habit of giving gifts without expecting a return on his investment. Her meeting with Catherine Connolly had been a sobering dose of reality. The journalist, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 40s, had confirmed Maya's suspicions. The rivalry between Ashford Industries and Mitsui was far more than just a corporate squabble. It was a war, and Adrian Ashford was losing. "Tanaka is a ghost," Catherine had explained, her voice low and conspiratorial, as they sat in a noisy, anonymous coffee shop in the West Village. "He operates in the shadows. He's been systematically dismantling Ashford's empire from the inside out, buying off his key people, stealing his trade secrets. Ashford is bleeding, and he's desperate." "So the card," Maya began, her mind racing, "is a Trojan horse," Catherine finished, her eyes glinting with a grim satisfaction. "It's not just a credit card, Maya. It's a tracking device, a highly sophisticated one. Every time you use it, Ashford will know where you are, what you're buying. He's not just giving you a blank check. He's turning you into a canary in a coal mine." The journalist's theory was both terrifying and strangely logical. Ashford was using her, a nobody, a ghost in his world, to flush out his enemy. He was betting that Tanaka, in his arrogance, would see her as a vulnerability, a way to get to him. "So what do I do?" Maya had asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You play the game," Catherine had said, a predatory smile on her lips. "You use the card. You live the life. You make yourself a target. And when Tanaka's people come for you, and they will, you'll be my inside source. You'll be the key to a story that will blow this city wide open." The idea was insane. It was dangerous. It was everything she had ever been taught to avoid. And yet a part of her, the part that was tired of being a victim, the part that was hungry for a life less ordinary, was undeniably thrilled. So on the fourth day, she used the card. She walked into a small independent bookstore in her neighborhood, a place she had always loved but could rarely afford to shop in. With a trembling hand, she bought a beautifully illustrated edition of 100 Years of Solitude, a book she had always wanted to own. The transaction went through without a hitch. The cashier, a young man with a man bun and a nose ring, didn't even blink. But as Maya walked out of the store, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Enjoy the book." The single letter was a chilling confirmation of her fears. He was watching. Every purchase, every move was being monitored. The game had truly begun. Over the next few weeks, Maya began to live a life she had only ever dreamed of. She moved out of her cramped East Village apartment and into a stunning, light-filled loft in Soho. She replaced her worn-out clothes with a wardrobe of designer labels, her cheap instant coffee with single-origin espresso from a trendy artisanal roaster. She took art classes, visited museums, and spent her afternoons sketching in the park. She was living the life of a wealthy, cultured woman, a life that was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. She was a fraud, an actress in a play she didn't understand, and she was constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The cryptic texts from A continued, a constant reminder that she was not alone. They were sometimes encouraging, sometimes mocking, always unnerving. "The blue dress suits you," one text read, after she had bought a particularly expensive gown. "Don't get too comfortable," another one warned after she had spent a lazy afternoon in a spa. She was a puppet, and Adrian Ashford was pulling the strings. But she was not a passive puppet. With Catherine's help, she began to learn the rules of the game. She started paying attention to the details, to the subtle shifts in the city's power dynamics. She read the financial pages, followed the stock market, and learned everything she could about Ashford Industries and Mitsui. She started to notice things. A black sedan that seemed to be parked on her street a little too often. A man in a grey suit, who always seemed to be at the same coffee shop as her. She was being followed, and not just by Ashford. Tanaka's people were watching her too. The first direct contact came a month after she had received the card. She was at a charity gala, a glittering, soulless affair that she had been invited to as a friend of Ashford Industries. She was standing on a balcony, a glass of champagne in her hand, when a man approached her. He was handsome, charming, and impeccably dressed, with a disarming smile and eyes that were as cold as ice. "Maya, isn't it?" he said, his voice a smooth, cultured purr. "I'm Kenji Tanaka." The name hit her like a physical blow. She had seen his picture in the papers, but she had never expected to meet him in person. He was the ghost, the puppet master, the man who was trying to destroy Adrian Ashford. "I've been hearing a lot about you," he said, his smile widening. "You're the city's latest Cinderella story, the waitress who captured the heart of a billionaire." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice a little too sharp. "Oh, I think you do," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He's using you, you know. You're a pawn in his little game. He leaned closer, his cologne a cloying, sweet scent. But a pawn can become a queen if she makes the right moves. I can help you, Maya. I can give you a life of real freedom, not this gilded cage he's put you in. He slipped a small encrypted flash drive into her hand. Everything you need to know is on here, he whispered. When you're ready to choose a side, you know how to find me. And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd as silently as he had appeared. Maya stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The flash drive felt like a burning coal in her hand. She had a choice to make a choice that could have life-altering consequences. She could give the flash drive to Catherine, expose both men, and watch the ensuing chaos from the sidelines. Or she could give it to Adrian, prove her loyalty, and become a more valuable player in his game. But there was a third option, a more dangerous, more audacious option. She could use the information on the flash drive for herself. She could play them against each other, leverage their rivalry to her own advantage. It was a terrifying thought, a leap into a world of shadows and deception that she was completely unprepared for. But the girl who had been content to be invisible to serve the whims of the wealthy was gone. In her place was a woman who had tasted power, who had learned the language of the elite, and who was no longer afraid to fight for her own destiny. She went home that night, and with a steady hand, she plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The information on it was explosive. It was a detailed account of Mitsui's entire strategy to take over Ashford Industries, including a list of key personnel they had bribed, a timeline of their planned moves, and the details of a secret backdoor vulnerability in Ashford's network that would give them complete control of his company. She had the power to save Adrian Ashford, or to destroy him. She thought about the man who had humiliated her, who had used her as a pawn in his high-stakes game. And she thought about the life she had been living for the past month, a life of luxury and freedom that had been built on a foundation of lies. She closed her laptop and looked out at the glittering, indifferent city. She was no longer a waitress. She was no longer a victim. She was a player. And it was time to make her move. The air in Adrian Ashford's penthouse was thick with a tension that was almost palpable. The city lights, which usually seemed so vibrant and full of promise tonight, felt like a cold, indifferent audience to a drama that was about to unfold. Maya had requested the meeting a power move that had not been lost on Adrian. She was no longer the timid, apologetic waitress he had summoned to the Mandarin Oriental. She was a woman who had walked through the fire of his world and emerged, not burned, but forged into something new, something stronger. She had arrived not in a taxi, but in a chauffeured car, a subtle but clear statement that she was no longer playing by his rules. She was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, her hair pulled back in a severe professional style. She looked every inch the corporate power player, a woman who belonged in this world of glass and steel. She had placed the flash drive on the polished surface of his coffee table, a small black object that held the fate of his empire in its memory chips. "What is this?" he had asked, his voice a low growl of suspicion. "It's the game," she had replied, her voice calm and steady. "And I'm tired of playing." He had picked up the flash drive and plugged it into his laptop. As he scrolled through the files, his face had gone pale, the color draining from his cheeks until he was as white as a ghost. He had seen the depth of Tanaka's betrayal, the intricate web of deceit that had been woven around him. He had seen how close he had come to losing everything. He had looked up at her, then his eyes a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and a grudging respect. "How did you get this?" "Tanaka gave it to me," she had said, her voice flat and unemotional. "He wanted me to choose a side." "And have you?" he had asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I've chosen my own," she had replied, and in that moment the power dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer his pawn. She was his equal. Now they sat in silence, the weight of her decision hanging in the air between them. The information on the flash drive was a ticking time bomb. They had a small window of opportunity to act before Tanaka realized his plan had been compromised. "Why?" Adrian finally asked, his voice raw with a genuine, unadorned curiosity. "Why are you helping me after what I did to you?" Maya looked at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Because I'm not you," she said, her words a quiet indictment of his character. "Because I know what it's like to have everything taken away from you by someone who has more power than you do. And because I believe that even a man like you deserves a chance to fight for what's his." But there was another reason, a reason she kept to herself. In the weeks she had spent living in his world, she had seen the other side of Adrian Ashford. She had seen the brilliant, driven man who had built an empire from scratch. She had seen the lonely, isolated man who was a prisoner of his own success. And in a strange, unexpected way, she had begun to understand him. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice a call to action. A slow smile spread across Adrian's face, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time since she had met him. "We play the game," he said, his voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "But this time, we play it together." The next few days were a blur of intense, adrenaline-fueled activity. They worked out of Adrian's penthouse, which had been transformed into a war room. They brought in Elias, Adrian's trusted head of security, and a small, hand-picked team of loyal executives. Maya, with her artist's eye for detail and her outsider's perspective, proved to be an invaluable asset. She saw things that Adrian, with his insider's blindness, had missed. She noticed patterns in Tanaka's behavior. She identified weaknesses in his strategy, and she came up with a plan that was as audacious as it was brilliant. They wouldn't just defend against Tanaka's takeover. They would turn the tables on him. They would use the information on the flash drive to launch a counter-offensive, a move that would not only save Ashford Industries, but would also expose Mitsui's illegal activities to the world. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy, a gamble that could either make or break them. But for the first time in a long time, Adrian Ashford felt alive. He was no longer the jaded, cynical billionaire who had lost his passion for the fight. He was the young, hungry entrepreneur who had once dreamed of changing the world. The climax came at the annual shareholders' meeting of Ashford Industries, a sterile corporate event that was usually a predictable, mind-numbing affair. But this year, the air was thick with tension. The rumors of a hostile takeover had been swirling for weeks, and the shareholders were nervous. Tanaka was there, of course, his face a mask of smug confidence. He believed he had the votes to oust Adrian and take control of the company. He had no idea that his entire plan was about to be blown wide open. Adrian took the stage, his presence commanding the attention of the room. He began his speech with a startling confession. He admitted that the company was in trouble, that he had made mistakes, and that he was on the verge of losing everything. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Tanaka leaned forward in his seat, a predatory smile on his lips. This was his moment of triumph. But then Adrian's tone shifted. He began to talk about a conspiracy, a campaign of corporate espionage and sabotage that had been orchestrated by a rival company. And then, with a dramatic flourish, he projected the contents of the flash drive onto the giant screen behind him. The room erupted in chaos. The evidence was irrefutable. The list of bribed executives, the details of the network vulnerability, the timeline of the planned takeover. It was all there in black and white for everyone to see. Tanaka's face was a picture of shock and disbelief. He was exposed, his reputation in tatters, his company facing a firestorm of legal and financial repercussions. In the midst of the chaos, Maya slipped out of the room, her job done. She had been the architect of Tanaka's downfall, the ghost in the machine who had turned the tables on the puppet master. Later that day, Adrian found her in the Soho loft, sketching in her notebook, the afternoon sun streaming through the large windows. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "I know," she said, not looking up from her drawing. He walked over to her and looked at the sketch. It was a portrait of him, not the powerful, intimidating billionaire, but the vulnerable, flawed man she had come to know. "I owe you everything," he said, his voice soft. "You don't owe me anything," she replied, finally looking up at him. "We're even." He smiled a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Not even close." He offered her a job, a senior position at Ashford Industries, a role where she could use her unique talents to help him rebuild his company. It was a tempting offer, a chance to have the kind of career she had never dared to dream of. But she surprised him. She said no. "I don't want to be a part of your world," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I want to build my own." She had discovered a passion for something other than art. She had discovered a talent for strategy, for seeing the patterns in the chaos, for playing the game. She wanted to start her own consulting firm to help other companies navigate the treacherous waters of the corporate world. Adrian was disappointed, but he was also impressed. He had underestimated her once again. She was not a woman who wanted to be given a seat at the table. She was a woman who wanted to build her own table. He offered to be her first client, to fund her new venture, to give her the resources she needed to succeed. This time she accepted. Their relationship had been forged in the crucible of a crisis, a strange, unlikely partnership that had begun with a spilled cup of coffee and a moment of public humiliation. It had transformed from a power imbalance to a relationship of mutual respect, a friendship that was as unexpected as it was profound. Maya never used the unlimited black card again. She didn't need it. She had something far more valuable, a future that she had created for herself on her own terms. She was no longer a waitress, no longer a victim, no longer a pawn. She was the queen of her own kingdom, the master of her own destiny. And as she looked out at the city that had once seemed so intimidating, she knew with a deep, unshakable certainty that she was finally home. And so a moment of humiliation became a catalyst for an empire. Maya's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest points can often be the launching pad for our greatest triumphs. She didn't just get an apology. She took control of her own narrative, outsmarting a system designed to keep her down. What did you think of Maya's final move? Was Adrian's apology enough, or was the black card the real game changer? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible story of resilience and empowerment, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you speechless. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. Until next time, stay inspired.